Good morning, and thank you all for joining the next webinar instalment from bluesource. It's great to see so many attendees, and we do hope that you enjoy today's content. A few housekeeping notices before we begin. So other than the presenters, all attendees will be on mute today. All and any questions we will be more than happy to answer post this session. We will provide contact information at the very end on the last slide in the form of both our website, an email address and a contact number as well. So on to the content for today. So today's webinar is how to protect, govern and manage your Azure workloads. Now this is a regular topic of conversation for bluesource alongside our clients and partners alike, and we very much wanted to share with you our thoughts and solutions around this today. So on to the agenda. So first and foremost, I am joined by VM Mercer, who should be over in our London office. Hi, VM.
Morning, everyone.
Morning, VM. Now, VM is the practice lead, as it suggests there, for modern workplace and digital transformation. Now, VM has been with bluesource quite a long time. He's a veteran within this area and has been very much at the forefront of our Azure methodology, specializing in a multitude of cloud workload efficiencies, not just around Azure, but multi options around cloud, both traditional and sort of next gen, securing those workloads and running a diverse list of applications optimally for our clients. So thank you very much, VM, for attending. I am also joined, who I believe will be over in Paris, is Pablo Martinez from Symantec. Hi, Pablo.
Hi, Danny. Thanks a lot for inviting me.
No, our pleasure. So Pablo is a Symantec EMEA Cloud and Security Compliance Specialist. He boasts a 12-year tenure with Symantec, serving a series of roles, both focused on clients and partners, and we are very pleased to have him attending this session with us today. Lastly, on to myself. I am Danny Fisher, the Management Support Services Practice Director at bluesource, and I'm going to be top and tailing this session today. On to the content. So first and foremost will be VM, giving us an insight into those cloud computing trends that we're seeing. So those trends that have grown over a period, organizations moving from one cloud to another, or indeed a traditional infrastructure to cloud. And just again, some of what to expect in and around the experience that we've had with those clients. Then it's on to the security and compliance around Azure estates. With the inception of GDPR, security and compliance around not just the regulated industries, but businesses on a whole is becoming a very hot topic. And again, VM wants to go into a bit of detail around that. Next, we're on to Pablo, who is going to give us an overview of CWA and CWP, or Workload Assurance and Protection. Now, this is a suite of management solutions, specifically around cloud security challenges. Again, what Pablo will be highlighting, giving some of the deep visibility and control that these tools provide, and also how it assists organizations with assessment of their security and compliance posture against best practice and their associated frameworks. Lastly, will then be myself giving a brief overview of the modern Azure management, taking a little look at the traditional MSP space, a few client examples where we've assisted businesses around leveraging Azure, and then just some of that next generation Azure management capabilities that you'll come to expect from us. So without further ado, what I'm going to do is pass you on to VM, who is then going to run through the first part of the session around cloud computing trends. Thanks, VM.
Great, thanks, Danny. Welcome along, everyone. I'd just like to take a few minutes to talk about cloud computing in general. So cloud computing can be interpreted in lots and lots of different ways. It could mean migrating to or hosting all your services from a public cloud such as Azure, or maybe AWS or G Cloud. Or it could mean simply backing up your smartphone config or your contacts or photos to maybe G Drive or iCloud or OneDrive. And of course, there's a continuing trend of consuming those software as a service apps, these apps that we lean on every day to help us in our lives. So public cloud infrastructure has been in the mainstream for over a decade now. So Microsoft Azure is around about 10 years old, and AWS is around about 13 years old. And in that time, public cloud services and the attitude to cloud computing has come a long, long way. So in those early days of public cloud, spinning up services was treated very, very formally. There wasn't much trust for the cloud, and IT retained control of all that power. This formal approach, in some cases, led to long provisioning times and impacted that very flexibility and the benefits of the cloud, and the whole point of public cloud computing. So over time, things have become slightly less formal, and now many organizations are empowering the wider business to stand up their own services. Now, although this delivers the flexibility, it also leads to lots of new challenges around how do we secure and manage those services. They're no longer owned by the IT department. So, for example, let's say you're developing a new app. Maybe it's for internal, maybe it's for external use. In the past, the dev team would more than likely put in a request for a new server to run that application on. The IT department would then go through some budgeting, some procurement of tin, build and then release that infrastructure to the dev team. And then they would start to develop the new app. If they run out of resource, more requests need to be put back in, approved, and go back through that procurement process again. So all of this just delays that development lifecycle for the new service, and ultimately costs the business. So what do we do now? Well, we simply give access directly to the dev team. They spin up their own cloud instances that scale as they need them. And that is dramatically reducing the time it takes to develop and release those apps. And with some of the very latest developments in DevOps, now the operations team and the development teams can work efficiently together, and ensuring that those development and release pipelines are fully optimized. So what I'm getting at here is that as more services become commoditized and we empower the business to do more, we help to drive productivity, but the focus of the IT department and the challenges that they face are changing. We're giving away control of the infrastructure and the platform, but we shouldn't assume that security is someone else's problem. Remember, it's still your data. You own the data and you're responsible for keeping it safe. Data is a really highly valuable asset that many of us really just seem to overlook and give away too readily. So what's really my point? Well, my point is that protection of data in a cloud environment is a shared responsibility. You're accountable for what data is stored where and how that data is shared. Then the app and the platform vendors you use and sign up to are responsible for ensuring that you store, that the data you store in their platform is secured. We're all responsible, and the level of what we're responsible for really depends on the type of service we're using. And there are largely three categories of cloud service, as you can see from this slide. Each of those requires a slightly different set of considerations around accountability and responsibility and where those demarcation points are. So IaaS, or infrastructure as a service, is where the physical layer is obfuscated from the operating system and the apps. The responsibility crossover is typically at the network or the OS level. Platform as a service, or PaaS, is typically used by dev teams to build out applications without needing to deploy servers. So we're talking about really the serverless revolution, or Kubernetes, or maybe simply a web app with a managed database backend. The responsibility crossover is then at the application layer. And then finally, SaaS, or software as a service, is where we simply subscribe to a service, deploy the apps, and the vendor takes care of the rest. We're still responsible for the data that we choose to store in that platform, and many of those sharing options within the platform, and of course the configuration and capabilities that we allow throughout that platform. But the app itself is viewed as evergreen, and the provider will manage the security updates and the release cycles. So as you can see, there is always a shared responsibility for cloud security and data protection. It doesn't really matter which type of service we're using. So the next section then I'd like to talk about is around how do we start to build a secure and compliant Azure estate. And one of the biggest challenges, as I said, or misconceptions with cloud services, is that people think they're just safe out of the box. And what I mean is that many people think that because this is cloud, someone else is taking care of security, we can just build our apps on top and not worry about anything else. This is just simply not the case, per my previous statements around the shared responsibilities. An example of this pertaining to Azure specifically is that Microsoft provides access, easy access to the Service Trust Portal. you can quickly go and download all of the Microsoft governance certifications and some of those audit reports. For example, ISO 27001, that's one that most people are familiar with. You can go and download the certificate of registration for Azure DevOps. Does that mean that any service you develop on top of that for internal or external consumption is compliant? Of course not. Your organization still needs to go and register your service with BSI and go through the audit process to ensure that you're compliant. So just because the underlying infrastructure is compliant doesn't mean that your apps that you build on top is necessarily compliant as well. You still need to go through those considerations. So some of the other challenges that need considering include skills. Deploying and managing cloud services in a public platform is different to an on-prem platform. Now, that's not to say that those skills that you've developed are not transferable, but we just need to make sure that we're considering the new features, the new ways of deploying that are available with the cloud. And one of the biggest challenges with skills, to my point in my opening gambit, is it's often not the infrastructure teams that are standing these services up. And so things like network design, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, infrastructure and cost is not really something the dev teams have had to think about before. So it's a change in mindset that we need as we're starting to develop these new services. And costs can really easily spiral if services are not thought about before they're deployed. When we deploy services on-prem, typically purchase some infrastructure, maybe some compute and storage, or we've raised a request for X amount of RAM and X CPUs, and that worked fine. But when we're working with public cloud, every additional gig of RAM, every additional CPU, as well as all that additional storage and the backup of that storage are going to have cost implications. So it's very easy to end up with an unexpected overage bill at the end of the month. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying don't let the business stand up services. Absolutely, we should let the business stand up services because that's how we're going to maximize productivity. But we do need to make sure that we're delivering the business a framework within which to deploy their services so that the base configuration is secure and compliant, standardized, consistent, and controlled. So how do we start to address this? So these are some of the key topics we need to consider when we're starting to build out our cloud platform. And we're going to look at each topic in a little more detail, but just at a high level. Identity management, so options such as privileged ID management, conditional access, storage authentication, multi-factor authentication, maybe even passwordless authentication now, things like key vault, monitoring and management for those activities, and of course, not to forget roles-based access control. Then onto the virtual network and the virtual topology. The design of this piece is key. So we need to think about network appliances, network security groups, front door services, IP schemas, all of our peering and connectivity considerations, things like ExpressRoute. How are we going to access the platform? How are resources going to interwork with each other? And of course, adopting a zero trust methodology across that virtual network. And then some of the automation techniques. So automation really means different things to different people, but I'm talking about here how to standardize the deployment methodology using things like resource manager templates, blueprints, policies, runbooks, and the CI/CD pipelines for managing those release cycles. And then finally, onto our continual assessments. So we need to make sure that we're continually reviewing the audit logs, running governance audits, security audits, vulnerability assessments, using things like log analytics, SIM and SOAR tools, and threat management and remediation. So there's both some inclusive tool sets that we can use and also partner tool sets that can assist with many of these options. So we're going to dip a little bit more in detail into each area. So identity management then. So ID management is widely regarded as the new security boundary, especially in the SaaS space, but actually across most cloud spaces now. People are accessing these services in the main from any device, anytime, anywhere. And so we need to ensure the identity is secured at all times and continually monitored and assessed so that any risky behavior is identified and contained as soon as possible. Specifically regarding Microsoft Azure services, there are several areas for consideration. It's good practice to synchronize your on-premises AD identities to the cloud if you're using AD. If you're not using AD, then you're going to be using cloud-only identities and your work is done. Next, we need to ensure that those identities are secured through conditional access. So why is that important? Well, conditional access enables us to use a combination of the app, location, device, and identity to request one or more factors of authentication and either authorize or reject that authentication attempt. And then utilize things such as privileged ID management to grant admin control to resources using a just-in-time approach. And what this is doing is ensuring that users only obtain access to those resources for a limited amount of time, secures that access, and then automatically revokes the access after the allotted time period. This also means that there's no longer necessarily a need to manage lots and lots of different accounts. I can have one account. This is my account that I use all day, every day. And that's going to be eligible for access to certain resources or roles, but no standing access or administrative access to any of those resources or roles. Should that identity be compromised, we're minimizing the risk and we're minimizing the attack vector. And then use things like Azure Key Vault. So anywhere you need to store credentials in for source code or maybe scripts, don't store them in the source code or scripts. Use something like Key Vault to store them in a secure and compliant way. We can also put certificates in there for safekeeping as well. We want to be ensuring that we're continually monitoring for abnormal behavior and contain any of those rogue processes to stop that lateral movement across the network. For born in the cloud accounts, we can use things such as behavioral analytics to assign risk ratings to identities, and that's all baked into the services. And we can use these risks to then influence conditional access decisions. And then finally, we want to start to make use of the Azure business-to-business and business-to-consumer services for controlling access to apps and services. That's going to free up your dev teams to concentrate on managing the applications rather than spending time managing identities. So the next piece then is around the virtual network and virtual topology. One of the fundamental decision points is around how to design that virtual network and how to design connectivity. There's just too many organizations that we see that are using the defaults, never really look back. And actually this works, and it may work well, but you'll likely end up in a bit of a mess at some point. We really need to treat the design of this with the same tenacity as we would most physical network designs. The decisions we make here really not only affect how resources communicate with each other, but maybe more importantly, could have a commercial impact. It may be that one virtual network or VNet is fine for the organization, or maybe it's not. If you provision multiple VNets and these resources need to communicate with each other, we're going to need some sort of peering. That's going to be chargeable. If there's no technical reason for segregating every single resource group through these VNets, then you may be paying a lot of money out unnecessarily. Do you need a perimeter VNet for your apps and services, or do you rely on the inclusive network security groups? Or maybe we're deploying a virtual appliance instead of those security groups, or as well as those security groups. So bluesource recommends the latter. We typically would recommend a network appliance to ensure the best possible granularity and security controls. Many of these third-party firewall vendors support all of the features you would expect in a typical firewall, and they also generally support a bring your own license approach with deployment straight from the marketplace. And so they're nice and easy to deploy and familiar to configure. And then still on the network theme, we need to use the same design principles as we normally would around things like the IP schema. But considering not only the cloud environment, but all of those connected environments and the wider connectivity solutions that we're deploying. And then we're designing the apps and services, need to make sure we're considering things such as web app firewalls and load balancers, along with traffic manager for global load balancing. So of course the platform itself has things like DDoS protection built in, and that's included in your service. That doesn't mean you don't need to consider protecting the app and the code, your code, from external threats. This is still very, very important, and no matter how much inclusive protection Microsoft provides, it's not going to close a hole in the underlying app or the underlying code. And we can also use things such as Azure Front Door to protect those apps, which is a new feature that's in preview at the moment, encompassing some of those techniques and services that I was just talking about. If you happen to be deploying virtual machines, it's possible to enable SSH or RDP access directly from the internet. This is really not good practice. So we recommend locking that down. One less attack vector that you have to worry about. Use something like a jump box, or maybe just internal connectivity to those resources. And then make sure to deploy a service that will protect against malware. So Pablo's going to be talking about the Semantic Cloud Workload Protection offering in the next section, which covers this area. And then my final recommendation in this area, and we really have only just scratched the surface here, but I recommend defining and using resource tags. So this really comes into its own when you're trying to report across the platform, across the management of the platform, and when we're looking at costs across the estate. So we can collate data based on resource tags and report based on those tags of the various services. So a solid approach to tagging is really essential. There's no real one-size-fits-all strategy when we're talking about tagging. An enterprise versus an ISV are going to want to approach this differently. But to give you an idea, we can tag based on client, based on business unit, the overall service, or a myriad of other possibilities. And this is going to allow us to later report, monitor, and manage groups of resources in an easy and consistent manner. So then on to automation. And automation, again, as I said earlier, is a very general term. Depending on the skills in the business, the types of resources that you're trying to deploy, and of course the appetite of the business, will depend on how far you want to or even need to go with automation. My personal view is that the more we automate, the better, but only where it makes sense. If you've got a process that's going to be run once a year, takes 5 minutes to run, and it's actually going to take us 2 weeks to write an automation for it, there isn't an ROI there to justify it. So we're better off concentrating our time elsewhere. But where automation really comes into its own is with those repetitive tasks that need to be run on a regular basis. Or maybe where we need to ensure standardization and manual input might impact that. So we recommend standardizing the deployment lifecycle through using a resource manager template. We typically see groups of templates being used pertaining to the different elements of that cloud infrastructure. And how you approach this, again, is really dependent on what you're trying to do. But for example, let's say you're running an internal IT service for an enterprise. You may be provisioning databases, storage blobs, network configuration, virtual desktops, and virtual network connectivity. On the flip side, if you're an ISV, you might be deploying an instance of your app many, many times over. Both of those examples can make good use of templates, but would approach the model in a different way. And then we need to think about the role assignments and the policy assignments required for the service or resources that you're trying to deploy. Wrap that whole thing up into a blueprint. This means whenever we deploy based on that blueprint, we can be sure that we're going to get a nice standardized configuration that complies with all of your requirements set out in the blueprint and all of the policies governing that. And then we can use this through a runbook or maybe PowerShell or maybe even a CI/CD pipeline to ensure that we're deploying that in a nice, consistent way. So finally then, we need to ensure that we are continually assessing the environment to ensure that the platform remains secure and we remain compliant at all times. So from an optimization perspective, it's useful to know utilization patterns, which then can help with capacity management and resource planning and cost optimization. So we only need run those resources when we actually need to utilize them, and we can shut them down to save costs when we don't need them. This is greatly simplified through the use of resource tags, which I spoke about earlier on. And then from a security perspective, we need to be monitoring and collecting signals and events for threat management and audit purposes. These can be through some native tools or streamed out to partner solutions as needed. So Sentinel is one such SecOps tool which allows us to start collecting those signals and perform some automated remediation of the platform. It's in preview at the moment and it's got a host of inclusive connectors to reach out to the various elements on the Microsoft Cloud. Then from a governance perspective, we should be continually assessing the configuration of resources to ensure our necessary regulatory requirements are met. This is also going to allow us to ensure that no new resources have been deployed that may not comply. So Pablo is going to be talking about the Semantic Cloud Workload Assurance offering in the next section, which can assist with this area as well. And there's many tools available in the platform, such as file integrity monitor, to ensure that given files remain secure and aren't compromised. And if they are, then flag them so that we can remediate those. And we also recommend ongoing vulnerability assessment scanning, and again, collating those signals into the monitoring and management tooling to make sure that as those new threats and vulnerabilities are identified, they can be dealt with in a timely manner. So currently there's a couple of vendors that have those sorts of tools, so Rapid7 and Qualys, certified services that will run with Azure services. And once we have all these signals, alerts and events, we need an easy to consume monitoring solution. So we at bluesource base ours on a service-oriented dashboard to quickly show and drill down into the RAG status of all of those in-scope services and dependencies across that platform. So Danny's going to be talking more about modern Azure management a bit later on. And so thanks for listening to me. That's it for me. I'd like to pass over to Pablo, who's going to be talking around the semantic offerings in this space.
Hello, and thank you, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Thank you, Pablo.
Perfect. I will share my screen. 1 second. Yes. Yeah. So thanks, Ian, and thanks, bluesource, to give Semantic the opportunity to share with you, with your customers, our solution offering in terms of securing workloads in cloud, but also in terms of compliance and assessing your services in your cloud environment. My name is Pablo Martinez. I'm the cloud security specialist in EMEA, and I'm going to go walk through the different use cases, and I will try to show you some brief demos so you get a feeling on how the solution looks like. First of all, I mean, when we talk with customers, we are seeing big interest in terms of cloud, moving to Azure, moving to AWS, moving to different clouds. So we see multi-cloud environments. That's something that it's a trend, although we see primary cloud providers in our customers. But as well, what we see is that they keep their on-premises partly, and they use other services, and they think about private cloud. So when you think about securing the cloud, it's not just the private public cloud, it's about also securing what you still have in your environment. So your data centers, your private cloud, and so on. So the solution or the suite we are presenting today, Semantic Cloud Workload Protection, is covering those environments. It's basically focusing on public cloud because it's a cloud native application or service. And this service connects through APIs through the Azure, AWS, Google, Oracle. But we also can manage from this cloud console of CWP your on-premises. We deploy an agent, and this same agent can be managed for the on-premise and from the public cloud environment. I'm going to talk mainly about our suite of Cloud Workload Protection, which is basically covering two main product categories. And if you think about what Gartner talks about security categories, we're basically covering the Cloud Security Posture Management, so CSPM, which is about assessing services. It's about proving compliance and mandate reporting. And then we are covering the data plane protection, which is the CWPP category, and it's basically the same name for Semantic Cloud Workload Protection, which is covering control of the applications, isolation, operating system hardening, anti-malware, something very important, the file integrity monitoring. When you think about microservices, containers, and the immutability of, you need to have file integrity monitoring. As if something gets changed, you can identify an event or an issue. In terms of use cases, I will simplify this to four. So we're going to talk here about multi-cloud visibility, main focus today is Azure, but as I mentioned, I mean, we have customers, and you know, when you think about the analysts, they mention multi-cloud environment is the majority of customers. So multi-cloud visibility is key. Multi-cloud compliance, proving compliance, being reporting on compliance, remediating the gaps in terms of misconfigurations and your policies. And then the data plane protection, we are going to cover the use case of compute protection, so workloads, VMs in Azure, EC2s in AWS, and with anti-malware and hardening, and then containers, so the compute piece. And then something that is very important nowadays, you know, most of the storage of the cloud storage, you know, is in the cloud environment. So you hear the data breaches presently on big companies in terms of, you know, S3 buckets, Azure is the blob storage. So it's very important to have a protection control in your cloud storage, anti-malware, and also DLP, data loss prevention, to avoid personal data or critical data to be exposed publicly and have breach. So let me go straight into the demo. Okay, just 1 second. So this is the Cloud Workload Protection console. And as you can see, it's multi-cloud, okay? I have here Azure, I have here also AWS, so I can see, you know, when you go to AWS, you see your instances here. I get all this information exposed in one console, one central location for all my security and compliance for my multi-cloud environment. So here I am in the compute section on the suite. And as you can see, I can see the AWS machines, where they are. This is all visibility use case, right? So I see the machines where they are. I see the type of operating systems, the threat status, if they are at risk, if they are publicly exposed. I see here an overview of the security alerts. Also the changes in my environment, how many instances have been deployed in the last 7 days, in the last 30 days. So I can get all this information. I also get information about the you know, services and applications being deployed. In this case, top 10 most used containers, and so on. Okay, so here I have an overview in terms of the compute, what's going on. I go into the Azure side, and if you see in the Azure, I have two virtual machines on Azure, and I get these 2 virtual machines here. You see one is green because one is being secure with Semantic Cloud Workload Protection Agent. So the anti-malware and the hardening capabilities, that's why it's secure, it's green. The other is at risk because it's not protected. It doesn't have the agent deployed. So it's an exposure here. And you see, I see that this machine is located in the UK South region, and this other one is in the US. So if I click here, you know, I get more information. I know that this instance, the name of the instance, the platform, the state of the instance is running, the agent is being deployed. From here, I can easily do a scan of the anti-malware. I can apply a policy group. I can stop the instance if I have configured the privilege or the permissions for this account. And I can get more information in terms of the software services being deployed. I get information if there is a container. In this case, you see I have containers, and it says if the container is online or is offline. And here you can see the same information. You know, if I connect to the Ubuntu box, okay, and I run a container, okay, I run a container, Docker container on Nginx on this machine, you will see that if I come here and they come back, it should appear the bluesource. Okay. Okay, I will come back later and I will show you that. It's not only visibility in terms of compute. Very important is the assurance piece. Okay, the assurance piece is where I see how my services are being deployed, and if these services are being configured properly against best practices or my own policies. So for example, as you see, if I go here into the dashboard and I go into the assurance piece, I can see in one click all the services being deployed. In red, those that are at risk because are not following best practices, and those on green, the one that pass the control, okay? You are also looking to the, well, here you have a high level overview of the services at risk exposure. And sorry, here's the Azure one, okay? And you can see also the last 24 hours, the last 30 days, and so on. And lastly, you can also see the storage piece. So you can see your cloud storage in terms of AWS, for example. You see I have a storage here, and if it's a scan or not scan, and if it's exposed or not exposed. So you have all this visibility in your environment. Now we move to the use case number 2 in terms of compliance. Compliance against policies, against best practices. So out of the box, the Semantic Cloud Workload Protection Assurance solution provides you policies. And as you can see here, we have the CIS for Microsoft, for Google, for AWS, and we also have security essentials. So it's semantic best practice with additional checks, not just from the CIS organization, but also from the Cloud Security Alliance. So you have more checks, and you can at any time, copy these policies. Okay, you can click in this policy. You can take the checks, or you can create your own checks. And the nice thing is that we can even automate remediation. So if there is, for example, ensure that auditing is set to on. Imagine that is failing. You can click here the enable remediation, and when it checks it, if it's a fail, it will be remediated. Okay, and then you can go into the reports, and you can see on the assurance side, we can generate reports, like for example, okay, it's here. Reports against PCI, against your mandate compliance. Okay, as you can see here, you get a PCI. Okay. Let's open it. Let's download it. And here you see I have a mandate compliance report, PCI 3.1, and I have all the details, high-level overview, check, pass, fail, and so on, by section, and all this. So we saw already. I go fast because we need we have 20 minutes to go through the presentation. So, but I wanted to show briefly these 2 use cases. So, multi-cloud visibility and multi-cloud compliance. You can create benchmark. You can create your own policies. You can create exceptions, and you can prove compliance with mandate reporting. Now, let's go into the second part, which is about the protection plane, the data plane. We are going to protect the workloads, VMware. Virtual machines, anti-malware, and hardening. So let's look into this use case very briefly. I go into the console. I go into the compute. Okay, and here you can see, for example, I have a Unix anti-malware policy. Okay, and this Unix anti-malware policy has been deployed into the instance of Windows. Okay, you see it's protected. And if I go into the Windows machine, here, I'm remotely connecting. Okay. Here you can see that if I go to the website of ACAR to download an anti-malware test file, okay, you see semantic anti-malware has detected it and it will block it. Okay. I want to show briefly the hardening capabilities. So let's go back here. As you can see, I am connected as user, and my user is an administrator, okay? Because I have created a policy that even if an administrator is connected on this machine, this administrator will not be able to open Notepad. So you can see, I try to open Notepad, it doesn't work, okay? And also create a policy that I say, even the administrator with administrator right, I don't want anyone to modify or to access any folder started with test, okay? So you can see, I cannot access, and I am the administrator, and I'm not able to access the test folder. Let's take a look at the policy. 1 second. Let's look at the policy here. So if you look into the policies, hardening policy, global policy, resource list, global rules. So you see that I have created a policy that no one has access to this test folder. This hardening capabilities is extremely important because when you think about the DevOps environment, you think about immutability, containers, you want to integrate this security by the conception of the image. Okay, so you can apply this protection, this hardening by when you build the image, and then you have all along the cycle of the machine or the compute or the container, the protection being deployed. Okay. So last thing I want to show here is the capabilities in terms of storage protection. Okay, let me just go here. So in terms of storage protection, we are going to offer, in terms of cloud workload protection, capabilities of anti-malware in blob storage. And the nice thing is that all the scanning is happening within your cloud environment. So no data is going out, no communication. Let's say if you are scanning all your storage, terabytes of storage, this is happening internally in your cloud environment, in your cloud subscription, okay? And I will show you that very briefly. I have a little video for that. And as you can see here, okay, this is, I am uploading into this blob storage all these files, okay? And some of these files, as you see from the name, are malicious, okay? So I upload it, and as you can see, what is called malicious file.exe, and so on. So I will just go a bit faster. You see that there has been downloaded, but there is a near real-time scanning capability. So this will be scanned against the anti-malware policy. And when you refresh it, okay, let me just go faster here. Okay, when you refresh, you will see that only 3 files remain. The others were suspicious, were deleted. And it will be metadata attached after the scan. So you see the scan time, and you see the verdict, clean or not clean. And if you add the DLP capabilities here, we will also be able to tag metadata in terms of the type of the data. Let's say if it's credit card information, if it's different type of data, you will get this tag in the metadata. So that's very useful use case, not just protection, but also in terms of inventory, understanding, you know, what type of data is stored in your cloud environment. And there are other things I could show in terms of DevOps, integration points, a very interesting one with Jenkins. We have a plugin for Jenkins, so you can check the code and the applications and see if there is a malware there. And also the Splunk integration is also a very important use case in terms of centralizing events and incidents and then forensics. And with that, I will hand over. Second, I would just I will hand over to Danny for the last piece of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pablo. Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for that. So last section here around modern Azure management. I'm going to be running through, should take around about 10 minutes, and then we'll be clear to wrap up today. Okay, so in terms of an overview of what I'm going to cover, I want to just first on sort of touch on the quadrant managed service capability that we have. Again, we've been doing this for quite a long time, circa 15 years. So the capability, both organic as well as structured, that's grown across that time. I then want to touch on the MSP and cloud, traditional managed services, and where maybe some businesses rest on their laurels around what that looks like in the cloud world. A few examples and some of our Azure experience from client aspect, and then also go on to the modern Azure managed service. So into the quadrant. So the service that's delivered by bluesource, we have a 24/7 service management center based within the UK across 2 separate sites. And there's a number of different ways to cut managed services. Now, we actually split them between both support and managed services, the first of which being top left, which is our remote assist. Really, this is a simple insurance policy that once you hit a ceiling of skills for your in-house capability, you're able on a 24/7 basis to get through to a subject matter expert around a lot of the core applications that we offer as a business. On the right-hand side there, you have the service desk. So these are first and second line skilled operators that are there to take everything from the simplistic issues that you may have and to pass you then through to second and third line capabilities. But in addition to that, it's much more a case that you're able to go straight through to someone that has that technical capability and be able to help you through that issue. Again, also in the space, we have a few expert desks that are more aligned to that of the end user based products, things like an Office 365 expert desk, for example. Bottom left is infrastructure and cloud. So 18 years, the simple view of traditional infrastructure, and then also with the adoption of cloud, how then that started to diversify, both in the form of hybrid or just leveraging simple elements through either PaaS or SaaS or indeed IaaS, and then indeed full Azure adoption or indeed other cloud, public or private. Lastly then is the darlings of the managed service world, which is around mission critical apps. Again, PaaS, we're seeing an awful lot of change in this market where what you're trying to get and achieve from an application, the visibility and the metric status that you have from them, and what you can then do and learn with that data. Again, it isn't just a case of the traditional keep the lights on and keep these systems running. It's about trying to diversify, ensure that its utilization and capacity are really leveraged, so that, again, it can expand for the business. So traditional managed services, again, there are thousands of managed service providers out there, most of which have a 24/7 capability, capturing the general issues that you would see for business operations. Now, whether that is a traditional hardware, hypervisor OS or application layers, many businesses have yet to make the transition over to what is that next gen world of cloud. That being said, the reason being is that traditional tooling like standard agent-based monitoring capabilities doesn't actually go into that granular detail that you need to support cloud environment. Yes, things like critical or security-based patches are still covered as part of those standard solutions, filtering out false positives around metric types and alerts, being able to pinpoint issues and obviously then be able to either react against those or in wherever possible be proactive in trying to isolate the issue and try and remedy that before its services go down, all the way through then to building out modular services that are scalable both up and down, because we appreciate that estates, they do not stay static and they do grow and shift over a period. So just onto a couple of examples where we have assisted organizations with their move to Azure, or indeed what it is they're trying to do with Azure. So this particular example was an organization, an ISV, that they were already in Azure. And again, what I've got displayed up there is just some of the marketing information around percentage discounts that you can receive with things like reserved instancing or hybrid user benefits in terms of licensing. So then in terms of the challenge this client had, they were enrolled on a Microsoft DA, they had an existing platform, but were experiencing an extreme sprawling cost. They also had it interlinked to a legacy storage platform that was retained in-house, but they had, as they're an ISV, well over 30 different clients that were starting to scale out rapidly on this platform. Now, because they didn't have any cost control in place and they had a very poor billing mechanism, what this meant for is the amount that organizations were paying versus that of really what the services were costing were completely out of kilter. So the objective for us was to really review that platform, look at how the spend in the program worked. Again, because they were an ISV, the different type of products that they have and the way that it utilized both the infrastructure, or the virtual infrastructure, as well as storage were very different. Understand how that utilization, how it was built and how it worked, and then start to put some definitions in place as to road mapping and forecasting of what that might look like based on trends and usage. And at the end of that, be able to put a nice billing model together to monetize not only the platform charges that were there, but also what those profits were going to look like. So what we did was a complete review of the platform itself. Now, we actually took them from a traditional enterprise agreement and actually moved them over to a CSP model. Again, much the same in that you could still pay per calendar month, but as part of doing it, we did a series of resizing around the virtual machines, everything from the type of server or services that were being offered, right the way through then to the type of storage types, whether you did actually need high demand or whether or not they could obviously just be low clocking. What we then did was deploy reserved instancing across 3 years. Now, this was able to yield this client around 50% reduction in the total cost for the platform. Alongside that, we added a further 15% reductions by enabling the use of hybrid user benefits, meaning that you don't need to pay for the second instance of those licensings within Azure. Ultimately, this did lead to a cost model that was both profitable for this organization, but also that they then had a much better view of what it looked like from the standpoint of where we moved it and the resources that were essentially booked and paid for, right the way through then to the forecast of that growth. Another example is an organization that went from a traditional infrastructure and fully adopted cloud. Now, the reason that they did this, like many organizations out there, they had a legacy infrastructure. That legacy infrastructure primarily was in-house, but they also did have a secondary co-location site, which was becoming increasingly more expensive. Their patching schedules and versioning on their applications were hugely out of date, and the end users had very low confidence in them. Now, the catalyst for this was that they had a loss of one of those systems that wasn't patched and updated. They had a poor DR solution in place, and for the type of organization that they were, that just wasn't going to be sustainable for them. So again, the review for us there was around what we would do as far as a cloud-first program, and obviously what the shift would look like and through the migration. All applications were either replaced or upgraded and patched obviously to its latest version. It also helped us to create a budget and turn what was a traditional CapEx model into an OpEx, re-establishing that end user confidence, but also making sure that a business continuity plan was solidly in place. So at the point of moving them over, again, a simple migration, either upgrading as we went, or if we had to upgrade, doing it in place. They were then moved over into that environment. We piggybacked a number of different Microsoft capabilities. The Azure Site Recovery, for example, around disaster recovery, as well as belts and braces, leveraging the Azure Backup program. A lot of the projects that they were running, they were then able to actually put those back on. VM touched on earlier, things like DevOps and being able to spin up resources at key points in time. And again, with the management from us, ensuring that those are then taken down afterwards, enabling that cost center charging, enabling that billing, and to avoid any cost sprawl. Ultimately, they were able to achieve what they wanted to with re-establishing that confidence from their end user base, being able to create a business continuity plan, and essentially be able to provide an environment that was up to date and it was ready to serve its end users at the drop of a hat. So lastly, I'm just going to come on to modern Azure management. So earlier I said about the traditional MSP and what that means to most organizations. They're looking for that safe pair of hands to look after someone's environment. Well, definitely that's how it used to be. The next generation of supporting not just Azure, but any cloud environment is the MSP needs to be agile. They need to be constantly revolutionizing and changing what it is that they do and what they offer. To be up to the minute, give visibility around not just the platform or the application, but its costs. So really and truly, managed services today is incredibly different to what it was, say, 10 years ago. Yes, 24/7, 365 visibility of any platform is key. That being said, the monitoring capabilities around both IaaS and definitely PaaS, they have changed. They've actually changed because it's a focus around the, as I've already said, the utilization of that platform and its associated capacity. Then also being able to take away from that trend and then be able to make recommendations of simple changes that can be made right the way through then to some diverse ways of delivering those services. Governance and compliance around these platforms, being able to offer a high level of business continuity. Again, leveraging things like ASR and having that sort of belts and braces approach to business continuity means that you can now start to get that 100% platform availability retention. Out of the box, Azure comes with 5 nines. And again, by putting on those additional plugins and additional layers, you're obviously able to build that out. Another thing is everything on demand. VM mentioned earlier around dashboarding. We actually have more than one tool. In fact, there's a multitude of different tools that give us different viewpoints of the environment. Now, also being able to see that dashboard, literally a plug and play or a click and play, gives you immediate service reporting. Again, that also helps us with things like detailing of trends, and also strategic recommendations can actually be generated autonomously through the system. All of which is backed by a traditional ITIL CSI program, ensuring, again, that you don't rest on your laurels, you constantly redefine what the service looks like. Now, today, I would say that almost every organization that we're putting into Azure have idiosyncrasies or slight differences to what it is they're looking to do and achieve. So again, with bluesource, we don't just say that the service is standard and that's what it is. We have to constantly change and sort of reinvent what that looks like for an organization. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining the webinar today. The session has been recorded, so again, if there are any slides in here that you want to go back to, obviously you can do that. But in terms of next steps, you can contact bluesource today with regards to Azure, and again, anything that we've covered off as part of this webinar. So what do they look like? The first is a cloud assessment and planning. Now again, this is really a case of assessing your existing environment via a traditional on-prem, a hybrid, or maybe you're already leveraging Azure or another cloud platform. It's to then create a plan that's specific to you, give you a visual representation of that, and then start to go into TCO and what that can look like in a commercial model. As we all know, cloud is deemed as being an expensive route for infrastructure, but as we have found through a number of use cases, that organizations can actually save a significant amount of money by leveraging cloud. And again, it's much more a case of making sure that you measure twice, cut once with these assessments. Again, reserved instancing and hybrid user benefits we've already touched on. Again, another huge cost-saving area. Cloud migration deployments. So at the point where we're ready to move, if it's just a case that it's app only, it may just be Office 365 or one of the associated products. It could be that you want to just dip in by using hybrid features where you have an interconnect between the traditional before going to full adoption. These are all elements that we can help you with. Then with Symantec, the CWA and CWP 90-day trial program. Again, this is something that bluesource can help with, both with the installation and being able to go into a bit of detail around that so that you can start to explore the rich functionality and capability that the two products offer from Symantec. Then lastly is Azure Operations and that next generation managed services. An area that we've seen a huge expansion and indeed a growth model in, purely because organizations are now starting to leverage Azure, but in terms of that core capability, it's really a case of making sure that they understand what it looks like, and obviously then those cost and billing models that I went through earlier. So that's the end of the webinar. Thank you all so very much for listening to us. Again, if there is any questions, you have our website there. There is also an email address for contact, and again, a number which you can call. So from myself, from Viam and Pablo, thank you very much.